No, I'm all right. Okay, great. Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to this evening's Overview and Scrutiny meeting. It's Monday, the 13th of July, 2026. Please be aware the meeting this evening is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. So also, please be aware that as part of the Council's commitment to reducing the use of paper, councillors will be using iPads and screens throughout the course of the meeting as well. I'm Councillor Milton. I'm the chair of this committee. And alongside me, I have Darren Knight, Deputy Chief Executive, Graham Leach, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer, and Kelly Barnard, who's the Scrutiny Officer. In addition, this evening, supporting our discussions, we have John Careford, Head of South Warwickshire Local Plan, Phil Clark, Head of Place Arts and Economy at WDC, and Andrew Cornfoot, Planning, Policy and Major Sites Delivery Manager. We also have members of the Cabinet here this evening as well to help us with our discussions. I will do the emergency procedure, because we do have a number of members of the public here this evening, so welcome to this meeting. I hope you find it useful and informative. There are no planned tests of the emergency alarm. If the alarm does sound, everyone present must leave by the designated exit route. If the preferred route is blocked, use the nearest signed alternative route. Do not use the lift. Everyone must assemble at the designated point, which is the central reservation in Regent Grove in front of the police station. Members of the public and press should report to a member of the town hall staff who will be wearing yellow fluorescent jackets. Councillors and officers should report to the committee services officer. Please do not re-enter the building until the fire officer advises that it is safe to do so. Right, on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies and substitutes. I've got Councillor Azelwood substituting for Councillor Luckhurst, and I have Councillor Dixon substituting for Councillor Payne. I'm expecting Councillor Mateski as well to substitute for Councillor Day, but he's not here quite yet. And I've had apologies received from Councillor Dray. Are there any other apologies? I know we're missing a couple, but we will move on. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have anything to declare on this evening's meeting? No? Okay, thank you. Right, thirdly, minutes. A bit of admin to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of June 2026. Could I have a proposer for those? Councillor Armstrong, seconder. Councillor Knight, are you happy to do that? Thank you. All those in favour? Great. Thank you, Councillor Azelwood. Any abstentions or against? Okay, great. Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the main part of the agenda. Evening, Councillor Whiteman. So, I'd like to thank members, first of all, for the circa 100 pre-meeting questions received, and also to thank officers for taking the time to respond to those. I know we do pepper you with questions, but they are all for a good purpose to aid our discussions. I'd also like to thank officers for the work that they did in arranging all member briefings as well, which were held on Thursday the 9th of July, and a town and parish council briefing on the 10th of July as well. That all helps with our discussions. We do have 2 public speakers this evening with us, so welcome. Before we go to them, I want to just give members a bit of a steer about how I plan to run the meeting this evening. So first of all, we're going to start with the public speakers. They will make a number of points, and I'm going to ask officers to respond to those points as well, so that members of the committee have the benefit of both the view of the public, but also the view of officers. We're then going to move into the discussion, and just a few things here. I did drop a note around to members beforehand. Firstly, if you've asked a pre-meeting question and it's been answered, please don't ask it again. If we need to build on those discussions, I'm build on those answers as a bit of chance for greater depth. More than happy to do that. I'm also not expecting that we'll discuss specific sites in detail unless they are, say, examples of a larger point that we want to make about the plan. At this point, if this committee were to make a recommendation that we remove a site from the plan, effectively we'd be back to square one, and that wouldn't be a very sensible place for us to be, and I'd rather have those discussions in another context, which I'll come on to. I'd also ask members just be very focused with their questions, so as far as possible, avoid long preambles and long introductions. A bit of context setting is good, so we know what the question's about, but otherwise keep them sharp. So what I will be asking, the way I will structure our conversation is, first of all, I will allow hopefully about an hour or so, or up to about an hour, for members to ask questions about things that have changed since we last saw the plan. So in the last 6-week period, a number of changes have been made, and I'm going to allow members time to discuss those and ask questions on those. In the second part of the meeting, I want members to consider 2 questions that we can provide feedback to the joint cabinet, which is happening tomorrow. The first one will be, I'll be asking members to reflect on the advice that we had from the planning inspector a number of weeks ago. So that's probably the first external view we've had of where the plan was, and to ask members whether they feel that the points and concerns that were raised by the planning inspector have been adequately dealt with by the responses that we have now made in the revised plan. The second item that I want members to take a view on, and again to provide advice to Cabinet, is about the soundness of the plan. Effectively, that is the question at the heart here, is do we believe, are we as confident as we can be that the plan meets the tests of soundness that are set out in the Cabinet paper? So that's what I'll be asking members to provide some input so that we can provide to Joint Cabinet. Do members have any questions on that as a structure, or is that clear and useful? I'm keen to try and avoid 6 hours of scrutiny, which is what we did last time. Although if we need 6 hours, we'll do 6 hours. But I think if we can keep things nice and sharp and providing some useful advice from members to Cabinet, that would be more useful. Okay, right, I'm not seeing any questions. Councillor Motegi, welcome. You just missed my preamble, so. Right, we now have 2 public speakers joining us this evening. There is a maximum period of 3 minutes allowed for each speaker. So I'm going to come first of all to Zoe Leventhal. Zoe, please, over to you.
I'm very grateful to you, Chair, and to the committee staff for the opportunity to address you. I fully appreciate that the whole Council is under significant pressure in the light of this process and are having to process large amounts of information at speed, as are residents, needless to say, and that there are no easy decisions. With that in mind, I'll endeavour to keep my contribution and question to one key point on process. Just to be clear, I'm speaking in my personal capacity as a resident of Kenilworth, albeit one with a legal background. And as you may know, myself and Mr. Lymes, who's in the public gallery, wrote a legal letter about the Oxford City Council judicial review, inviting the full council to reconvene to consider the Regulation 19 outcome before deciding whether to submit the plan to the inspectorate. I'm very grateful that the council's legal officer, Mr. Bell, has confirmed on the 8th of July that that is what will happen. However, as to the process to be adopted going forward, that is not yet clear, notwithstanding that the questions have been asked on that subject in the pre-scrutiny questions by this committee, including numbers 2, 8, 9, and relatedly 1 and 25. So for my part, I don't think the answers given yet provide a clear answer to what the process will be followed. In particular, I would like this committee to consider and ensure that the process and timings are clear in advance of what that Regulation 19 process will look like. Number one, what councillors' roles will be at the next time, if the plan proceeds, full council looks at it. And number two, what role the public and other stakeholders will have and when. I think this is essential to ensure that there's fairness for all involved and that the decisions are taken properly. If this is simply presented as a rubber stamping exercise, then my view is that it will not be lawful. There needs to be proper engagement with the points made. Although it's a narrower process than issues and options and preferred options, if there are clear objections as a matter of policy which go to the soundness of the plan, then the plan will not be sound. And those are points that can and must be taken into account by the Council when the full Council reconvenes to consider the Reg 19 process. Just a particular concern is timing, given that we have the summer holidays coming up. So how long will there be for the Council to report on the representations received, and how long will residents and councillors have to consider this before the meeting? And as a final point, the reason this is of particular concern is because, with the greatest respect to everybody who's been involved so far, from the residents' point of view, the process has been characterised by a lack of transparency and not a level playing field, because we have been faced with huge amounts of material, both councillors and residents, at a very late stage without a proper opportunity to look at them. A rushed through plan is a false economy, because an unsound plan is better than no plan. And that's all I wish to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And that was bang on 3 minutes. Okay, and now I'm going to hand over to Susan Miles. Susan, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Susan Miles, Shrewy resident of 46 years. Comments to address the Hatton proposal. The magnificent natural resource of our Greenbelt takes on even greater significance in the fight against climate change. It provides us with trees, hedgerows and fields which store carbon, absorb floodwater and reduce the heat island effect of urbanisation. The byproduct of controlling sprawl is that we save priceless areas of green space on urban doorsteps. England's 16 green belts provide open countryside for in excess of 30 million people who live in the urban areas within them. The Green Belt, one of the greatest acts of politics in the last 100 years. National BBC television on the 24th of June 2026 discussed climate change and the heat island effect that the built environment is producing. The conclusion was that local authorities and planners must factor in the effect on public health from rising temperature and maintain more open space in current and future development. A WDC Senior Planning Officer report on a development proposed close by, also bordering the M40 motorway and railway, recognises in the Council's refusal the area is especially significant as it is the only area of ancient countryside in Warwickshire. The pastoral character of the landscape is also important in its contribution to ancient Arden's distinct sense of place. This view was endorsed by the development management leader. The Hatton Green Belt proposal site exhibits the same landscape qualities. It is within the same landscape region and lies just 3 field boundaries away. It is my view that this proposal, removing hundreds of acres from the Greenbelt, 1, cannot be achieved, 2, cannot be delivered, 3, is very definitely not a sustainable option in its present form. So 4, why is it even being considered when the detail is so vague? Thank you. I have had copies of the document to which I've referred.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. And again, thank you for keeping to time. So a number of points raised there. I think, Mr. Clark, am I coming to you to respond? Oh, so.
I'll start off, but maybe my colleagues would like to come in. In response to Zoe Leventhal's point, I think we would agree that it is important moving forward, and as we move towards having a plan which can be submitted to the Secretary of State, that we are as clear in advance as we can be. All members appreciate the immense time pressures we're all under. These are not time pressures of our choosing, they're time pressures brought about by government, and I think we're all aware of the changes to the planning policy framework which require us to submit our local plan by the 31st of December this year. If it wasn't for that pressure, we would have more time to do that work. But I also, as one of the officers who's had a contribution in producing a lot of this paperwork, myself and many others, we do accept there's a huge amount of material to absorb, and we do accept that the limitations of the timescale we're under, the quantity of material we have to produce, mean that it is difficult, and it's a conversation, Chair, that I know we've had in the past about making sure that information is brought to you in a timely way. All the points that Zoe Leventhal made about making sure that there is sort of proper engagement, and if there are any issues of policy that result in the plan not being sound, we need to be very careful about those. All I can say is we will make sure that we take full and proper legal advice as we move forward, so we as officers give you as councillors the best advice we can do. Now, you'll be aware that when the Joint Committee met at the end of May, and then Warwick District Council met on the 1st of June, the decision was taken not to bring back the local plan after the Regulation 19 conversation, and in fact there's a council resolution to that effect. Stratford, of course, District Council didn't meet, so they didn't make a similar resolution. So in one sense you could say we had a political instruction from the council to go ahead with this occasion being the last time you would have to look at the plan and formally resolve whether you wanted it submitting to the Secretary of State after the Regulation 19 consultation. As you know, and is set out in the report for various reasons, and Zoe Leventhal is, as I know, very aware of them, we have come to a different view, and we've advised councillors that we do bring it back. And I would just agree with all her points about making sure that the process and timing is as clear as possible.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, the points that were raised by Susan, particularly around the importance of green space and the green belt and Hatton development. Oh, I think you've got the button again, Mr. Clark.
Yes, I'll deal with that. Yes, Susan Miles. Yes, you make some very good and important points. The green belt is important. It does provide a green lung, and along with all other countryside, it provides. It's important for tackling climate change. The reality, as we know, and it's one of the matters that you have been considering and will be considering with this plan, but the reality is we have to find a significant amount of growth. We are required to positively prepare our plan in order for it to be sound. Part of positively preparing it is meeting the minimum requirements for the amount of development land that we provide. You'll all be familiar with the standard method and the amount of housing that has generated. That's something I know we've debated and discussed several times before. We also, we do have a brownfield first approach in this local plan, which would seek to protect greenfield sites, whether green belt or non-green belt, as much as we can. Unfortunately, work that we've done has established that there are opportunities for brownfield development, but they are limited. So, I was going to say regrettably, inevitably, we are forced to look at greenfield sites. And again, as members will be aware from the lengthy discussions we've had over this, we are having to make a number of green field allocations. Because of the nature of the geography of Warwick District, a lot of those are green belts. And of course, as part of the growth strategy that members have supported in the past, you've supported an approach which is more of a focused approach. So rather than having a large number of dispersed land allocations, you have still a significant number, but a smaller number of larger allocations. And that's around principles of sustainability, of 20-minute neighbourhoods and the other principles we've discussed. And the selection of Hatton, along, I have to say, with a number of other sites in the Green Belt and sites not in the Green Belt, is part of that. But that's all part of the picture, the strategy that you're being asked to consider.
Great, thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Careford, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I think there were sort of 2 points made. One is around the selection of sites and the loss of countryside. I think Mr. Clark's dealt with that. The other point really about urban cooling and the need for open space. Absolutely, and yeah, the heat wave we're having at the moment, I think, demonstrates the need for shade in our urban areas. And I just want to give comfort that the policies proposed in the South Warwickshire Local Plan, just some references, so we've got ID 13, which is green and blue infrastructure, BN4 is about trees, BN1 is about landscapes. It's ensuring that we get the design quality, we get lots of open space, and I think that one of the strengths of the South Warwickshire Local Plan is the amount of open space we're putting into the developments, and by having concept master plans, hopefully we can capture that and make sure we get the highest quality development. It's not wall-to-wall concrete, it's never going to be that, but hopefully we've got sensitively designed places that really major on the soft infrastructure, the soft landscaping, as well as the hard landscaping. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Careford. I think the other thing that may be worth drawing members and the public's attention to, which I don't think you mentioned, Mr. Clark, was the draft communications and engagement strategy, which I think is being set out as well, which should help with actually communicating out to residents. That's included in the ONS pre-scrutiny questions and answers as an appendix. It's marked as it's not yet complete, but I understand the challenges of trying to do a lot of things all at the same time. Okay, thank you. Right, so we'll move on now to the substantive discussion. So again, 3 parts, discussion on changes that have been made to the plan and any questions on that. And then we'll move on to the response. And we may cover some of these things as we go through as well, inevitably. Responses to the planning inspector's concerns, and then also the soundness of the plan. Mr. Careford, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cornford, do you wish to say anything by way of introduction, or do you want me to just throw it open to members for questioning?
I don't mind just making a few very brief observations. Just to say that obviously, as members will be aware, following the joint cabinet committee and then the meeting of this council at the end of May, early June, there were a number of recommendations made for further work that had to be done, and a number of clear political directions that we were given by yourselves as councillors to look at. And the structure of the report and the way we set it out looked to do that. So just to summarise, there were issues around housing allocations and numbers. There were issues around housing density. There were issues around the access and transportation policies and a desire to support growth in accordance with the transport hierarchy. There were issues around viability, and of course you didn't have the benefit of the viability report back in May. There were some issues around heritage policies, and then there was a sort of a catch-all for other changes to the local plan. So the way we've sought to set out the report is to look to address those. And again, as members will be aware from the briefing that Mr. Cornfoot gave last Thursday, that those areas have been the focus of the work that we've been working on together with you over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Clark, just pop your mic off. Right, members, who wants to start me off in terms of questions? Councillor Kohler, we'll come to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to the officers for all the, I'm sure, exceedingly long hours that have been put in over the last 6 weeks or so. It's hard work, going through the outcome of those 6 weeks of hard work, but I'm pretty sure that the 6 weeks of hard work was harder. I don't know if I'm making sense. Anyway, I'll get to my questions. Right, so there's one thing that's changed is that now the sites all say a minimum of. And I did ask a pre-scrutiny question about this, but to build on that. So in the answer to the pre-scrutiny question, you gave some examples of where other local plans had said approximately. And there was one local plan which is currently going through, or it's been through a Reg 19, I wasn't quite sure, where it says a minimum, though that seems to be, it specifies a number and then it says a minimum of these will be bungalows, so it's not quite the same. So my question is, I guess there's two questions. Is there a maximum? So for these sites, we say, for example, there'll be a minimum of 1,455, and I understand how we came up to that figure. It's halfway between what our consultants said and what the developers have said, but expressing a minimum, is there an implicit maximum? Is there an explicit maximum? Where are we in there in terms of the local plan when it goes through?
The housing requirement we have from government is expressed as a minimum. What we have tried to do through the work we've done, and you summarised it very well, is try to get as realistic a figure as possible. Our consultants did some work on master planning and they identified one figure. The developers, site promoters were more ambitious. Now, you might say that ambition is poorly founded, or you might say it's very well founded. And you'll appreciate that the site promoters have done quite a lot of work because we've asked them to do quite a lot of work to promote their sites and provide, their own evidence of why they feel their figures are reasonable. And that had to be set alongside the advice of our consultants. And indeed, if you do compare the numbers from this report with the ones before, actually there were some sites where we didn't just choose the middle point between what the consultant said previously and what the promoter said previously. What we did was we brought the two sides together. So if the promoters could persuade our consultants that actually our consultants had got something wrong and maybe been unduly pessimistic, if I could put it that way, as to the capacity of the site, that number would go up. So the figure we've got is a realistic figure. It's not a maximum figure. Your question is there a maximum figure? Well, I suppose technically the answer is no, but realistically it will be what can be delivered on that site which accords with all the other policies of the local plan, meets things like the concerns of highways and everything else. And also from the site promoter's perspective is something that is marketable, deliverable, and they can sell the houses. So, and indeed there was a question asked at the previous scrutiny committee where we had even more questions than this time, where there was a question about what was the evidence from the allocations we made in the current local plan in terms of what subsequently came forward. And the answer was that I think in the main, not everywhere, but in the main, you would get higher densities. And when we are looking at those planning applications, when they're coming before the planning committee, we would look at them on their merits in the context of all, assuming that obviously the local plan's adopted, we would look at them in the context of all of the policies in the local plan. And if they meet all those policies, in terms of everything from amenity space to open space to transport and highway considerations, then there is no reason why they shouldn't be approved. You'll also be aware, of course, separately that we have had policies to increase densities in some sites. And again, it's all part of a desire to minimise the amount of land that we have to allocate and have to bring forward, and to make best use of what land we do allocate.
think Mr. Careford wants to come on that.
Thank you. Just to add to what Mr. Clark's just said, from a more sort of technocratic perspective, it also builds in further flexibility into the plan and the trajectory. It adds to the potential headroom. It therefore adds to the robustness of the plan, ensure that overall we've got a deliverable plan. So it's striking that balance between promoting, the 20-minute neighbourhoods, a good planning, good design, as well as having a plan that is more effective, because a more flexible plan, particularly in very uncertain circumstances, is certainly beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you for both those answers. I guess the question is, so the impression I get is that you're expecting applications would come in somewhere between the number in the plan and somewhere between the number that the developers have said. So in that kind of ballpark, is there a risk that a developer goes, oh, so there's a minimum, I could just double, triple the density? Is that a risk, or would other policies kick in and prevent that?
It's a theoretical risk, but your final point is the right one. All the other policies would kick in, and I think that would be very unlikely. It's worth bearing in mind the amount of work that has been done, between us and the promoters to identify the amount of housing. So you could say that this midpoint figure that we've reached is actually an informed, reasonable idea. Indication the developers, side promoters have suggested a higher figure. The result could be somewhere between the two, but again, always subject to meeting all the other policies of the plan.
Thank you very much. The other area I just want to explore a little bit is just about affordable housing and the changes that have been made to that. As I understand the policy now, it will now saying 40% across Warwick District would be the level, including sites taken out of the Green Belt. So we're kind of not implementing the golden rule in the NPPF. So the NPPF says 50% for any sites being taken out. I've done a rough calculation, and I think that's roughly 1,300 affordable houses that we would be missing out on across Warwick District because of that change. We've had a couple of pre-application adverts for sites. So what is now LEA 1, Richborough promoted it, saying they would quite happily deliver 50% affordable housing. Taylor Wimpey have done the equivalent on LEA 2, and they've also said in their materials, it says 50% affordable housing. And I guess if they bring forward a speculative application before the local plan kicks in, they would have to deliver 50% affordable housing because of the golden rule in the NPPF. So why are we not just going with 50% on any site taken out of the Greenbelt?
Thank you. I think the key point to note is it's a minimum of 40%. I believe it is. Let me just double check. I don't want to get that point wrong. Let me just
It says minimum of 40% affordable housing provisions on site subject to viability.
Yeah,
so,
indeed.
So it's not a minimum subject to viability. So they could still come back and argue that that's not viable.
Well, indeed, and they could argue that 50% is not viable, and the NPPF, it is subject to viability in any event. And we have a mixed viability picture, and I think that is confirmed by the fact despite our evidence suggesting we've got, demonstrating we've got viability challenges, we do have a number of promoters that are still saying that we can do the 50% full housing, and we can maximise that. So I think it's working with the promoters, and if they want to come in with 50%, then we will gladly take that. I think we just need to make sure that if they're coming in with 50%, that they're doing all of the other things that we need them to do, and it's striking that balance between the very high need for affordable housing, absolutely right, but also the infrastructure and everything else that needs to go on that site. So we thought that the most appropriate pragmatic response was to set them as a minimum, and then we strike that right balance. But I'll leave it there. Phil, if you want to add something.
I think Councillor Davison wants to come in as well. So
Yes, it's a tough one, that, Councillor Kohler, and me reading paragraph 157 of the MPPF again. I think it's pretty strong, isn't it? So to me, if ONS want to recommend that, we will look to try and include it. You obviously know with the viability it's extremely challenging, and so we don't know what will the final outcome would be, but I take your point, and if you want to propose it, we'll see what we can do on that.
Yeah, thank you. The only point I'd make in addition to what Mr. Careford said is, of course, yeah, we are getting these speculative proposals coming forward. They are saying that they can meet the golden rule and the test in the MPPF, and of course, if they can, that's very welcome. But they're doing so, we would assume, and obviously we haven't seen their detailed viability work, we assume they're doing that on the basis of the policies in the current Warwick District Local Plan. The viability report that was done for the South Warwickshire Local Plan was based on a whole suite of infrastructure that members were keen to see delivered as part of the South Warwickshire Local Plan. So were these sites to come forward at a point in the future after the local plan had been adopted, there may be a different consideration of viability. But certainly where we can deliver more affordable housing, it would be, of course, good to do so.
I'd be interested in what other members think, but I would be of the view that any site being taken out of the Greenbelt should absolutely still have a minimum of 50% subject to viability. I mean, they've still got the wiggle room of subject to viability, so if they say that they can't deliver 50%, then okay, well, that's a conversation. But to just concede the point straight away seems, well, if I was a developer and the local plan said 40%, there's no way I would go for 50. I would rather pocket the profit or give the money to the landowner. So, yes, if other members are interested in taking that forward, then I would be very happy to propose some kind of recommendation on that.
Yeah, Councillor Kohler, I'm seeing some nods from around the committee. Do you want to make a recommendation that members can either discuss or we could go straight to a vote on? If we have
So it would be a recommendation to amend policy H03 such that sites being taken out of the Greenbelt are subject to a 50% minimum of affordable housing provision on site, subject to viability.
And maybe we add the words in line with the provisions of the NPPF. Right, do members have comments on that, or could I have a seconder? Councillor Armstrong is seconding. Okay, we'll go to a vote then on that. As we go, all those in favour? Okay, right, that's unanimous. Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Kohler, we've got our first output. Councillor Kohler, I've got other councillors who want to speak. You're welcome back. We've got Councillor Mateki, then Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Mateki.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I apologise for being late. The traffic was absolutely horrendous. If only the council had a decent transport and planning portfolio holder. First of all, I'll turn around and say that this is not a South Warwickshire local plan. Let's make this absolutely clear. If this was a South Warwickshire local plan, the distribution of houses would not be as it is. If we were now a unitary council, or if we were a South Warwickshire as we planned to be years ago, would we have put these homes in the places that we have, in the Greenbelt? The answer is no. What we've actually got is a Warwick District local plan and a Stratford District local plan, which are sharing the same policies. Because I don't think there is a single house that Stratford need to deliver or Warwick need to deliver that is actually in the other district at this moment in time. So let's get that out in the clear. What I want to talk about is how this has been scored, because it's not clear to me, and it may be in the papers, but there is so much that I have missed it. So can officers tell us how these sites were scored and how they were evaluated, because as I see it, I think there's about 3,700 sites being, homes being removed that were previously structurally vital and evidence-backed, and now they have been taken out. And it just doesn't seem to make sense. So, yeah, how was this evaluated in the first instance?
And just so I'm clear, this is in reference to the changes that have been made since we saw this 6 weeks ago. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you, Councillor Mateki. A number of sites have been taken out of the plan from the one that you looked at the end of May. And as I've said before, that was one of the instructions that we had from the council, from Warwick District Council, and the target was to try to remove between 1,500 and 2,000 from the homes from the plan. So that was the instruction that you gave us to look at. So what was the approach that we took to that? Well, firstly, we could have looked to see whether there was one or more, but it might have been difficult to do more than one of the strategic growth sites. So we could have done the whole thing in one site. Now, as you know, some of the strategic growth sites are considerably more than that amount, but we could have done that. We were mindful that the strategy of the plan is to seek to focus growth on a smaller number of larger sites, and that's all to do with the 20-minute neighbourhood principles and other principles that we've all been keen to see put in the local plan. It's also the case that actually strategic sites it is less easy to score them, if I could put it that way, because I think the phrase that was used by the council at the meeting in June was the worst performing sites. And the strategic sites that have been selected on a wide range of reasons, including their deliverability. But so for those reasons, we started by looking at the local growth sites, which I think have been occasionally called non-strategic sites in the past. So we looked to do those. So the first thing was we didn't want to take out previously developed land, first of all, so we took those out of any assessment. There's also a principle of looking to take, we did have some sites that aren't in the green belt and a number that are. So the principle was in accordance with the NPPF paragraph, I think it's 145, which says you should have exceptional circumstances for taking greenbelt land out of the greenbelt. Well, if actually we were having fewer homes to allocate, it would be logical to look at, and right, and NPPF compliant, to look at greenbelt sites before non-greenbelt sites. So, as I say, we then prioritised those sites that were in the greenbelt. We then looked at sites which our greenbelt assessment had said were not greybelt sites. So if you remember, the greybelt sites is a new description that the government have put into the current iteration of the National Planning Policy Framework. And again, paragraph 148 of the NPPF says that where you are looking at greenbelt sites, you should be prioritising greybelt sites over non-greybelt sites. So our assessment looked at a number of the sites. Some sites we allocated and some that we didn't, as to whether they were greybelt. And there was a couple of the sites, well, one in particular that was not considered a greybelt site. So clearly, in accordance with the government's priority, we selected that, and that was Ken 2, I think it was, a site in Kenilworth. We then looked, and this is where we get to the scoring, and I know the wording was a councillor wording, not an officer wording. I wasn't very comfortable with the words worst performing, because actually, if they'd been poorly performing, we shouldn't have allocated them in the first place. But there was a scoring system. It was in our Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment, our HELA, and that's all on our website. And yes, the sites did score differently. Some scored higher than others, and basically a low score is a more suitable site than a high score. So some of the sites were less well performing in that sense, and indeed of the sites that we had previously allocated, the 3 sites that had the least well performing score were the 3 sites in Kingswood. So we took those out. We also then had to look at the balance with the housing trajectory, because of course, as a separate argument, a separate discussion that we had last time was about needing to make sure that we have a 5-year supply on date of adoption of the local plan. And if you do remember, the plan back in May showed Stratford not quite achieving that without having what was called a step trajectory. So Stratford put some more sites in so that it didn't need that step trajectory. And that approach was very much following the advice we got from the planning inspector at their visit. So we were keen to make sure we didn't fall into a situation where Warwick District would need a step trajectory. And then, as I say, we looked at sites which would look to take us towards our minimum, the minimum request from councils to look at a minimum of 1,500. We didn't quite get to that, but I think the figure is about just under 1,300 homes. But that was the sort of the methodology that we went through to get to the sites that we took out. So there were a couple, although they're right next to each other in Kenilworth. There were the 3 in Kingswood, and then there was 1 site in Hampton Magna.
Thank you. That sort of brings me on to my next point. I recall seeing an email of the evaluation process of some of the sites, in particular, the assessment between the Lapworth site, the Kingswood site, and the Hatton site. And I was quite appalled how officers put forward all the reasons why the Lapworth site was not good and all the reasons the Hatton site was good. It was not an apples for apples exercise. And when I actually looked at it, all the arguments for the Hatton site could equally have applied to the Lapworth site, except with the exception that you're not landlocked with the canal. You've got a lot of areas with the Hatton site. You've got problems with the sewage grids, major utility overhauls, massive highways restrictions. When you looked at Lapworth, you had a far better route in, a better access to the railway station. You've actually got a footpath going to the railway station. And now we've taken out 3 sites out of Kingswood, which is next, to Lapworth station. It just doesn't make sense. And to me, I would have thought you would have presented the best performing sites in the first place in May. So surely now, by removing the non-performing sites, you're actually putting in, to make up those numbers, even worse performing sites. Because the question is, why weren't they in the plan in the first place?
Well, you'll forgive me, obviously, I mean, colleagues may be able to help. I wasn't involved in the detailed site assessment. But just to be clear, all the sites we put forward in May were the better performing sites. And we're talking the non-strategic sites. And it's good to I think it's important to make a distinction between the local growth sites, the sites that we're talking about here, and the larger strategic sites. But they were all, there were a lot of other sites that were less well performing than we could have included. And indeed, if we needed to find more land, we'd have had to go further through the list of the sites that came forward. But the sites we brought forward in May were the best performing of all the local growth sites. However, as I said a minute ago, they didn't all score exactly the same. Some scored better than others. And when you asked us to take out some of those sites, we, as part of the assessment process I went through a minute ago, we naturally looked at the sites that performed least well. That was all we did.
Thank you. If I may just finish off, Chair, just a question which I did ask I did send it over the weekend. Hopefully officers picked it up. And it's an extension of Councillor Kohler's question about the distribution of the homes. Councillor Kohler asked for them by ward, but I am more interested in what the split is by county division. I'm sure many here will be looking at unitary, that's going to be announced in the next couple of days. And we've already been seeing that whether it is a single or a twin Warwickshire, that you're going to be using the county boundaries to elect a new council. So I wonder how is that affected? And personally, I already have, as the county councillor for Budbrook and Bishop's Tanksbrook, the largest electorate in the whole county. And from what I can see, the vast majority of housing is being dumped into my county division.
Thank you, Councillor Mateki. I think Mr. Leach wants to come in on that as well.
Yeah, I just feel for the committee's benefit, I should clarify, Councillor Matetsky, no decision has been taken on warding arrangements in any way, shape or form yet. And those proposals are still being considered and nothing has been submitted to MHCLG either. So while there is work going on in terms of numbers, the actual warding pattern has not been agreed as yet and probably won't be till much later this year. There has to be a submission by the 17th of August, but no decisions as yet.
Thank you, Mr. Leach, for clarifying that, and I fully understand that, but I'd still like to see the numbers as distributed by county division rather than district wards.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I did see your email this morning on that. We're happy to try to do that for you. The only point I would make is we, as planning officers, we did not look at boundaries, whether they be parish, ward, county division, when we were making our assessments. And you wouldn't expect an inspector at examination to look at this. It is not a reason for making a land use planning designation to look at the existing ward boundaries. You could argue the changes to district ward boundaries and divisions might follow the grant of permission for major new developments, but we haven't looked at that. But I'm certainly happy to go away and see if we can find that information for you.
Great, thank you. Now, Mr. Careford, I know you want to come in on this. Can I just check? It's an additive point. I'm just, for the sake of speeding the meeting through, I'm trying to avoid two people answering every question.
It was just to say that, councillors, there is a growth strategy topic paper that's on the website that sets out the methodology that we've used for the site selection, in addition to the HELA that Mr. Clark referred to, and the Annex C to that is about the strategic sites. So it would explain why Lapworth wasn't taken forward, but Hatton was.
Thank you. I think we're on to Councillor Armstrong now, unless I'm missing anyone else. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to follow up on a pre-scrutiny question about the viability further work. So I asked about what further work was planned before the December deadline, and the response points back to the position paper, but the position paper is quite vague about what's actually coming. I think it basically says further assessment and evidence development. Given there's not that much time left, I just wanted to ask what further assessment and evidence development is actually planned and when we might see that, because there's certain gaps in that viability paper that I think need filling in before submission.
Yes, thank you. It's about refining what we've got and working with the promoters, getting them engaged with our consultants to really bottom out the cost assumptions. There are some generic assumptions that have been used because of the nature of the model, and what we want to do is really build on the work done to date and get a much more specific data set that can inform the viability assumptions to make sure they're as robust as they can be, really. So that's where the work is focusing on. I think we've had a project board set up, and we have the South Yorkshire Local Plan Member Advisory Group. I think those two forum will be the the best means to take that work forward with members, to have that member oversight. So I think sitting here now, it's not fully bottomed out, I'll be honest with that. I think the priority is about getting the papers and the agenda published, but it's clearly the priority, along with obviously running the consultation and assessing the responses. But it's just drilling down into that level of detail and making sure that where we've got a cost, we can use that, and to make sure that cost is an accurate one.
Right, thank you. I think I saw Councillor Kohler first, then Councillor Dixon.
I think Councillor Kohler is deferring. Can I move this on to one of the things I think this section of the meeting is meant to be focused on, which is things that have changed since the last time, and one of those for which I'm grateful to officers, because I have been requesting a communications plan as part of what gets presented to both councils this time, and I'm grateful that this does now appear, although if I'm honest, having worked in communications for more years than I care to remember, I'm struggling to know what good would look like as a result of this strategy as to how officers would determine a good response from members of the public, from all the stakeholders. I can't see any metrics in there in terms of how many responses and the quality of those responses. That might reassure the planning inspector that the process that we've gone through for Regulation 19 is a sound process. I'm conscious, Chair, that we have planning officers here, not communications officers also.
I think it's slightly tricky because you can have an effective consultation and you can have an effective plan that the two don't necessarily could co-join. Obviously, we want both. I think that, in terms of what good looks like, it's having a engagement with the plan that ultimately we get meaningful responses. But I suppose what we want, we've prepared a plan that we believe to be sound and deliverable. In that sense, we hope that residents, members, stakeholders agree with us. Now, the way that consultations generally work is that people generally only respond if they don't agree, if they disagree. So in some respects, a really good consultation would be one that had very few responses, because it would suggest there's a lot of support for it. So I think it's getting that engagement, it's people understanding what the plan's about, and I think going to having those responses that are meaningful. So for me, that's the key thing. It's having a lot of responses that are answering responding to the soundness points rather than just generic comments, because that does show a level of that they've not grasped the purpose of the plan. So for me, that's the point. That number of meaningful responses.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Dixon?
No, but maybe I could put my question to the portfolio holders and the leader as to what they would consider a good response as part of Regulation 19.
Councillor Davison or Councillor King? Who wants to take that one?
A good response would be a comprehensive response from different sectors of the community and stakeholder groups. We can't expect them to be positive because nobody wants this plan. But we do have to hope that the arguments that we've put forward and the plan that we're bringing forward, we need to communicate that is doing something which is an onerous task for the whole district, and that officers have tried their very, very best to do the best that they can given the circumstances. So that would be part of the plan, a good response, but also that we can get across that actually a huge amount of work has gone into doing the best rather than doing anything less than the best, and that we cannot avoid doing damage because that's what development does.
Councillor Davison.
I think officers have said several times that this consultation, in quotes, is more messages to the inspector than to us. I mean, some of it will be for us, but a lot of it will be that particular residents and developers say this site's better than that site for whatever reason. And that's then for the inspector to evaluate and see whether they agree. Now, clearly, as a council, we should be comfortable that least worst options have been chosen, that these sites are reasonably good in terms of that number of houses that we're forced to allocate, and that there aren't others that are glaringly better. That's not saying how good the response is, that's saying how good the plan is, but that's, I think, what people will be trying to flush out, because clearly if somebody wants one site rather than another, that's what they'll be arguing for. And it's, there may be things that mean, oh gosh, we've got to change what we put in the submission, but as you know, they have to be minor changes, otherwise we have to reconsult and so on, and that extends the process considerably.
If I may just come back briefly, I wouldn't like the consultation to be just about the sites. There's a lot of policy stuff in there, and in particular the infrastructure. And as I'm sure we all know, what really gets to residents is when infrastructure, which was promised, doesn't get delivered either on time or to budget or to specification. And we're asking residents to trust us here with stuff we don't like, they don't like, but we're saying it will be accompanied by infrastructure at a timely and appropriate moment. And I hope very much that part of what good looks like is, oh yes, we'll get the schools, we'll get the leisure facilities, we'll get the health and wellbeing centres as well. It's not just all about the sites.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Mateki, I saw you shoot your hand up. Is it a question on this point? Okay. Councillor... Oh, right, okay. All right, sorry, I was just... and Councillor Dixon, did you want to make any recommendation on this particular point? Perhaps along the lines that clear success criteria for the communications plan and the consultation are set out in advance? That's what I've scribbled down here.
I would very much like to propose that this overview and scrutiny makes that proposal. Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Keffer, do you want to jump in?
Sorry, just a quick point. And apologies if I misunderstood the question, but yeah, there's difference between a successful consultation versus the success of the plan. And, you know, I completely agree that the success of the plan is around ensuring that we get high quality sites with the infrastructure delivered when we need it. And there are a series of monitoring indicators in the plan that will enable us to manage that process and check that those targets and policies are being achieved. So I think it's that twin point I was trying to capture, that you've got the plan, but then you've got the consultation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Chilvers, is this on this point as well? Okay.
So yeah, thank you for raising the point about timely infrastructure development, and it's certainly something that in the transport stream over the last month that I've been focused on trying to tighten some of the wording, because something that making sure stuff is delivered before first occupation is really important. So to give an example, putting in that it's essential that street lights and safe footways are put in, which doesn't happen a lot of the time at the moment. And I think if we go to Reg 19, that is the kind of thing, if they say, well, actually, we could tighten that further I do think that would count as minor, and I would definitely welcome, because I want developers to have to deliver stuff on time for our residents.
Great, thank you, Councillor Chilvers. So I think we've basically got a proposal, I think, from Councillor Dixon. It's a recommendation to Cabinet that clear success criteria for the communications plan and the consultation are set out in advance. Are you happy with that as a proposal, Councillor Dixon?
I am, Joe.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kohler, can I take all those in favour? Okay, right, I think that's everyone. Great, okay, thank you, Councillor Dixon, that was useful. Then we've got Councillor Kohler, then Councillor Mateki, and then I think I will want to move on to the next item of discussion, if that's possible. I've just told on Mr. Leach wishes to add something.
Apologies, this is more for the public gallery. Can you just move your paperwork back off the shelf? Because if you knock that off by accident, that's potentially coming down on somebody's head down here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, Chair. Wanted to talk quickly about viability, if that's okay. So we obviously have the Aspen on Verde report. It seems to have had quite an impact. Am I right to say that it wasn't in line with what you thought it was going to say before you received it? Is that a fair comment?
Yes, that is a fair comment, yes.
Have we double-checked their maths at all?
From experience, their assumptions are reasonable ones. I have looked at some of the values that, again, are reasonable, seem accurate. So in that sense, yes, we're satisfied that it's a robust piece of work.
Thank you, that's very good to hear. Am I right to sense that it's the level of infrastructure that is being requested to support the sites that then has the knock-on effect to the viability? Is that the dynamic that's at play here?
I think it's two things. I think it is that. I'll come back to that point. I think the other issue is the general state of the economy. So the housing market is quite sluggish. And the development industry have also seen a significant increase in costs. Now that's across the board, that's not affecting South Warwickshire. And I've been speaking to other councils and developers elsewhere, and that is the situation. It's a very challenging time to be doing development and to be doing local plan. So we're in that wider context. But then on top of that, we have got quite a high infrastructure bill that we're putting on top of this. Now, the reason we're doing that is because it's necessary. The message we've had from residents, parish councils, members, stakeholders, service providers, is that our infrastructure is, in essence, at capacity. We've sweated the assets. And in order to meet this scale of development, we really need to provide new infrastructure. So it's in that sense, it's unfortunate timing. And I think that's why I was perhaps surprised about that. We knew the wider picture, but yeah, it is challenging. And I think it doesn't really matter which site you go with. All of the sites need the new infrastructure. So it isn't a case that we've picked certain sites that are just performing poorly. I think across the board, the infrastructure is required. Now, generally, providing large strategic sites is a more effective way of providing infrastructure because you get the land included in that. The risk, I suppose, is that you just see commuted sums and then the infrastructure provider is unable to deliver the actual infrastructure. So with all that context, that's really why we're setting out the approach we're taking with subject to viability. We're really over the next 6 months and continually trying to work with the industry to make things viable and seek whether it's affordable housing grant, infrastructure grants, because we know that in order to deliver the development the government needs us to deliver, we need the infrastructure.
Thank you. Yes, I know that some people struggled to get here on time because of the traffic, which was caused, no doubt, because of the roadworks that are currently going on near one of the river crossings in Leamington, which then has a knock-on effect with all of the others, because our infrastructure isn't quite up to it. Can I ask...
Sorry, Councillor Keller, Councillor Chilvers was wanting to come in as well, so I thought that would be useful.
Thank you. So I've got two main points on viability. The first one is about what we can't change. The second one is about what I think we can change. So the rules around viability, which we can't change, which we tried to challenge, there's a couple of examples that the NPPF says that developers have a right to between 15 and 20% profit. Now, we have pushed for that to be reduced down to the 15% level. But basically what that right means, that the government have built in, is that right to profit is more important than resident infrastructure. And I personally think that that is morally disgusting. But that bit we can't change. Like, we have challenged those assumptions, and Aspinall Verde will not change them because they say that that is industry standard. And likewise, there are marketing budgets in those assumptions, which I think are ridiculous. But they will not change them because that is the industry standard. And they are basically saying marketing is more important than resident infrastructure delivery. And I think that's disgusting. That's the bit we can't change. The bit I think we can change is that Aspinall Verde are presenting a worst case scenario. You know, we're in a really difficult place in terms of the housing market, and that's what they've based the assumptions on. They're also assuming that we wouldn't get any housing grants, any transport grants, anything at all. And historically, that's just nonsense. You know, and so what the officers have done a great job doing in the last couple of weeks is putting together the topic paper, which came out with the viability assessment, which began to make that evidence base about historically Stratford and Warwick districts have done a brilliant job of bringing in money for affordable housing, which will have a massive impact on viability across the board. It will leak out into all the other areas. And what I'm very clear on is that I will not make policy decisions based on a worst case scenario, which is what originally we were being asked to do. Now we've got an opportunity to make those policy decisions about what's in the plan on a much more reasonable case scenario because of kind of this bridging document, the topic paper that the officers have been working on. And there's more work to do on that, but it is giving us a more reasoned way forward than we originally thought.
When you say the topic paper, is that Appendix 11 of this meeting? Okay, right. So members of the public, it's not called a topic paper, it's called the viability position paper, just for clarity. Right. So what I was going to ask was, you know, when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about schools, we're talking about health centres, we're talking about travel, roads. I guess, am I right to assume that it's not really the schools and the health centres that are the problem here? It's the cost of getting our roads up to a standard where they can bear the weight of the extra traffic. Is that the main driver, or is it across the board?
I think it's fair to say it's across the board. I think development costs have skyrocketed, construction costs, so that doesn't matter whether it applies, whether you tarmac for a road or concrete for a school. It's across the board, is my understanding.
So I can't help but interpret the viability report as saying the market can't bear this number of houses. It's kind of a supply and demand. It's economics. Does that resonate with anybody, or is that me just doing the sums wrong?
Well, I don't think the report's saying that. I think because it's done on a site-by-site typology basis, what it's saying is that if you make certain assumptions about costs, whether that's land value, developer profit, and etc., and then you apply certain inputs around build costs, it doesn't give you much headroom to pay for, let's call it, the public good. And the model that has probably worked for about 30 years has been that essentially, and I take Councillor Gilbert's point here, but essentially the presumption is that the development pays for that infrastructure. Now, we all know that that isn't the case, it isn't true, it never has been true. But that's the model, that's the starting point. And I think the point we're saying here is that actually, in order for the scale of them to happen, because we need the mix of sites, it's likely that we're going to need some external funding to provide for that infrastructure, because at the moment, based on those assumptions, it doesn't appear to be stacking up. That said, and this is where we need to do some further work, it's just trying to refine those assumptions. The other point is that this is at a point in time. We have a plan that's looking to run for 25 years. I think there is a genuine question mark over whether viability studies are actually a meaningful exercise to do for local plans. I was at a conference recently and that question came up. I think the consensus was they work fine for a development appraisal, but they're not really set up to do what they're trying to do here. Now, whether they remain, who knows? But at the moment, we have to do one. At the moment, ours is saying viability is challenging and it's a mixed picture. But I think what we've got here is an approach that acknowledges that and sets out a means to try and address that and ensure that we do maximise affordable housing as well as achieving the infrastructure to support that development.
Thank you, Councillor Collett. Right, so I've got Councillor Mateki, then Councillor Azelwood, then Councillor Dixon. And then I do want to move on to the next part of the meeting, if possible. So just members and officers, obviously, if we just keep things concise and sharp, I think that will help everyone. So Councillor Mateki first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually pleased that officers have said that the Aspinall Verde figures are pretty good, because in there they actually state that the Hatton site is not viable. So if they're producing a good report, it's not viable. So what are you going to be doing to make it viable? And when will site-specific viability reports be published? If we're going to turn around and say we've now got the park and ride just west of the A46, that's basically pie in the sky. We've seen the park and ride built in Stratford, northwest of Stratford, at Bishopton, to help support that development. Well, it may as well be a scene from a western. The only thing missing is the tumbleweed rolling down the car park. So that's an absolute disaster. And we're talking about infrastructure here. Again, pie in the sky. If you think developers are going to put all the infrastructure, all the major roads that are going to be needed first, it's not going to happen. Again, if you want an example, go to Stratford. Developers promised the earth at Long Marston. And then, when they couldn't afford the road that they promised they were going to build, they went running to the county council to ask them to fund it. So it's just not going to happen. It really isn't going to happen.
Thank you, Councillor Mateki. I don't think there was a question in there, but I think the point was made. Councillor
There was a question in there about the viability. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, could you just repeat, just so that...
Yes, so I was asking how is the Hatton site going to be made viable, because the Aspinall Verde report states it's not, and when is a site-specific viability report going to be published?
Mr. Clark.
Just a couple of points there. Obviously, as is stated in the report, in the covering report, viability is an iterative process, and we are going to carry on doing more work around viability between now and submission, and indeed after then. But to answer the specific question, what the viability report said, the Aspinall Verde report said, was that Hatton wasn't considered viable under the test assumptions. So that was before we started looking at whether we might have to, so it assumed the 20% biodiversity net gain, the all of the net zero carbon policies, etc., etc. And what it concluded was that the Hatton scheme could become viable if affordable housing is reduced from 50% to 40%, which is what we've now reflected in the policy. Now, that brings us back to the earlier discussion of whether it should be, we should be seeking a higher one, because, of course, Hatton would be a site to which the principles of what they call the golden rules in the MPPF would apply, that we should be looking at 50%. And again, if we could get 50% on Hatton, then great. But what the viability assessment is saying is that's one site where we couldn't deliver on 50, but we could be viable on 40. And that's underpinned the policy approach that has been taken.
Councillor Chilvers, is this quick?
You're right, Councillor Mateki, developers have got away with infrastructure murder. One of the main reasons that I think we need a local plan is to have as tight as possible for developers to put it in, and that's what comes back to my answer to Councillor Dixon earlier. We've got to be as tough as possible in the local plan on delivering that infrastructure, because otherwise there's no point in having one.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelwood, will come to you now.
Just a clarification following the point Councillor Chilvers made earlier. So just the interpretation of the viability report. So should we interpret it as being a worst case scenario report, or has it been provided as a more specific view about viability? Is it our interpretation that we put on it that this is a worst case scenario, or is it produced as a worst case scenario?
I think it refers to it being, I think the wording could be seen as a worst case scenario. It wasn't produced explicitly or specifically as a worst case scenario, but I think given the outcomes and understanding how it's been put together, that's not an unreasonable conclusion to have drawn, and that's why I say we've prepared the position paper just to try and explain that and contextualise that a bit more. But say Aspinall Verde certainly refer to it in some respects being a worst case.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. I fully appreciate the difficulties that the Aspinall Verde report put the planning officers in, because it came in only on the stated the 30th of June. And in paragraph 6.2 of the accompanying position paper, which is helpful, which officers have put together with Appendix 11, it talks about the further work that is required with consultants and land promoters and infrastructure providers to confirm the timing and other sources of income. Is there any assurance available that that is just minor work? Because my understanding of the process here is councillors are being asked to make a decision that this is a sound plan and can go to Regulation 19 consultation, and yet paragraph 6.2 seems to be saying there's an awful lot of work to talk about the timing and other sources of infrastructure funding. That doesn't sound like minor to me, but maybe there's some assurance available on that.
Well, I think there is a slight difference between minor or the significance of a change and its soundness. So if, let's say, the further work showed a vastly improved viability picture, and that then meant that we could increase our affordable housing requirements, that would be a I think a major change, you'd go from, let's say, 40% to 50%. But I don't think it would have a major impact on soundness, because the soundness is a much wider concept around the principle of the approach you're trying to take is the approach underpinned by evidence and so forth. So I think, yeah, that's a hypothetical example, but I think there is a distinction there between the 2 points, and what the Regulation 19 consultation gives us is the opportunity for people to make recommendations around soundness and suggest how they think it could be improved, and then we will look at those, assess them, work with members, and then we will present to both councils in December a schedule of modifications that we think are necessary to address those soundness issues, and it will be for the inspector to deal with those. So I think it's, yeah, it's like 2 different points there.
Sorry, can I just clarify on that? And we are coming on to, slightly coming on to the next point, but the report that we had from the planning inspector, I'm not quite quoting it word for word, but it does basically say that if sites are found to be unviable, the plan will be found unsound. I think I'm hearing something different from officers, that actually viability is almost neither here nor there.
Well, the planning guidance talks about viability not undermining the sustainable development, and viability isn't a specific test in the plan in the examination. It falls under the, I suppose, is the plan effective? Or is it deliverable? And I think what the inspector was flagging is just the point that we hadn't at that point understood when he made his visit, the viability position. We have that, accepted it's challenging, but what we do have is an approach that tries to explain and contextualise that, and sets out mechanisms that we will work with site promoters, and therein, so bear with me, 5.6 of Appendix 11. So I think as long as we're addressing the point, then you've got you're dealing with your resolving the soundness point and the concerns. If we were to ignore it and simply say, oh yeah, this is all fine, we haven't done viability, so now we're just going to go with this, then that's not sound. But we have evidence, we understand it, and we're dealing with the impacts, then that is an approach that hopefully we can demonstrate to the new inspector that means we have got a deliverable plan, and therefore in turn we've got a sound plan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so members, what I'd like to move on now to is the other points we wanted to cover this evening. So firstly is the response to the planning inspector, or the planning inspector's report that we had quite late before the previous meeting, and whether members had questions about those. I've got Councillor Kohler.
I guess it's a point of order sort of thing to start with. Has that report from the planning inspectorate, has that been published anywhere?
Yes, it was published at the last joint cabinet papers, and it was something that we reviewed. Mr. Clark?
Yeah, just to be clear, if you remember, there were a couple of addendum papers to the last joint cabinet committee, and Appendix 1 to the addendum paper was I've got a copy of it here, it was the notes of an advisory visit on the 19th of May from the planning inspectorate.
Okay, I think it's, sorry, I hadn't spotted it in the papers for this one, so I was just wanting to clarify that. Thank you.
Great. Do members have any questions regarding the response? Councillor Dixon.
Can I ask officers a question that I think you, Councillor Milton, asked last time in full council? because I think most members here haven't gone through this process before, so we haven't got the experience that you have of being through a local plan inspection. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not very confident and 10 is very confident, do you feel that what we are now putting out, or what is now proposed to be put out as sound, meets the concerns raised by the interim planning inspector?
At the Joint Cabinet Committee, and then at full council in May, on the 1st of June, there were some recommendations considered which had been put together in response to the officer report and very much in the light of the recommendations from the planning inspector visit. At that time, officers provided advice to the full council. There was like a briefing note that was circulated with the full council papers where we set out some of the risks and issues around some of that. This report obviously shows what we've done to try to meet those. I think my view is we have worked very hard to continue to positively prepare, and that's the word in the MPPF, a plan that meets the requirements. I think, if I'm being honest, there will be a number of issues where we will be challenged, but then that's the nature of an examination. There are a number of areas where I think, and you know, it's a matter of public record because officers have previously said where we think there are risks. But the important point is to have a plan that is seen to address the issues it needs to address sufficiently positively for an inspector to open a public examination. That then allows you to have the debate about all of the things you want to. If there are too many things that are causing the Ministry, MHCLG or the Planning Inspectorate concerns even before the examination opens, the plan could be returned to us. That's the worst case scenario for us. That's the highest risk. And I think we have tried to put some proposals together that positively look to address those. So I don't want to give it a score on a scale of 1 to 10, but if the council was to support the proposals that have been put forward together, and I would say they're not just prepared by officers, there's been a huge amount of member involvement to deliver them, then I think we're in a good position to have a plan that we can put before an inspector, and then some of those areas where we know we're going to be challenged, and the planning inspector advice letter makes it very clear what he thought they were, then I think we're in a good position. And as Mr. Careford said a minute ago, on issues like viability, there wasn't a viability report for him to look at. There now is, so I think we've got a much better story to tell around that. I don't know whether my colleagues have.
Mr. Careford wants to come in.
Yes, and I responded to Stratford members in May on this point. There were no surprises for me from the inspector, the advisory inspector, which is always positive, but it was really helpful just to get that external view. It's identified or confirmed where we believe, as Mr. Clark said, we think the risks are. So in that sense, it was a really helpful exercise.
Great, thank you. Councillor Davison, you want to come in. Might be useful as well, I'm sure members would appreciate your view about the question that's been posed to officers as well, in terms of what's the level of confidence that we've addressed those concerns from the planning inspector.
Well, it's a strange process. I think we all agree that. And there is a bit that if we take just two examples, the viability, so level of affordable housing, and the headroom, i.e. how many extra houses that we're allocating above the standard number, If we reduce the affordable housing and increase the headroom, so more sites, then there's more chance the inspector will say, yeah, that's fine. You know, you can build that because there's more options for developers to build and more profit because we're not putting the constraint on the affordable housing. So the question I would ask everybody is that what we want to do? Do we want to make it, you know, give lots away, if you like, which I think would be to the detriment of the district? Or do we want to, I think, cut it fine, sail close to the wind? I don't know what phrase you want to use, but do we want to find the absolute sweet spot that it passes the examiner, but we're not giving carte blanche to concrete over more land than we need to? And the same with affordable housing. We know we desperately need that. So officers have been great because, yeah, we I think collectively, but as a cabinet, we pushed quite hard to say, you know, we want to do the best for our residents, and it's trying to find that balance. And if we ask them, and there's a barrister that we've asked, you know, how close can we go? How many sites can we remove? How much can we reduce the headroom? There's not a clear answer, is there? So we'll only know when we get to the inspection whether it's been a good call or not.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Cornford, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just refreshing my memory of the inspector's note. There were a lot of suggestions and recommendations from the planning inspector who came to visit us. A lot of the points he made were things that we were already planning to do or had already done. He obviously only had so much time to review all of the information that we shared with him. But in terms of some of the key points that he did identify, one of them was a concern around having a stepped trajectory, which was the case for Stratford District. We've addressed that. There's no longer a stepped trajectory. He expressed some concern about the lack of headroom. The headroom has increased since then. He made comments about affordable housing and that you can set different affordable housing levels for different parts of the plan area. Again, that's something we've since done. We've addressed various other comments he made. So, for example, there was comment around retail and town centres, so that's been picked up. One area which we as officers didn't necessarily really agree with the inspector on was his comments on net zero and building performance, because essentially his comments seem to be saying you shouldn't go beyond building regulations and the future home standard because the draft NPPF suggests you shouldn't. Well, that is only a draft. We don't know what the outcome of that consultation will be. So it's quite right for us at this stage to be continuing with the inclusion of those policies, which is what we've done and which I think is what members have wanted us to do. So I think from my perspective, probably the biggest challenge we will have at examination is likely to be around viability, because as Mr. Careford said before, we are in a challenging place at this moment in time. And so I think, notwithstanding what I just said before about it being reasonable to have policies such as the net zero policies we've got in the plan, if there are issues around viability, then I think we will come under pressure with having those policies in the plan. But yeah, overall, I think the plan that is put before members now has addressed a number of those important points that the inspector made.
Great, thank you, Mr. Cornford. Councillor Hazelwood.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll sort of don't ask a question which is a bit like one that's already been asked, so I won't. But my concern really is if the largest site allocations, the strategic site allocations, such as those at Hatton and Cov 1, are at best marginal, how confident can we be that the plan as a whole is deliverable and doesn't trip up at the examination? And I think to some extent you've answered some of that, but go on. I mean, my concern is we're facing these irreversible decisions about allocating good agricultural land and greenbelt to housing. And if the evidence showed that these were highly viable, highly sustainable, infrastructure rich, then that's one thing and might provide public benefits and justification. But how do we justify this when it's our own evidence, as well as the external review from the planning inspector, is to the contrary? So my concern is, how do we justify some of the compromises that Councillor Davison referred to as potentially being required in the context of a plan to change whole rafts of green belt and agricultural land to housing, when we're not getting the benefits that we might otherwise have expected from affordable housing and so forth?
Well, I think the first point is we're still striving to ensure we get those benefits, and so the viability position sets out a mechanism where we can do that, because the thing with the strategic sites is they will be built out over a very long period. Some of them, perhaps not the ones you cited, but some of them are not even going to start for another 5-10 years in any event. So it's acknowledging that they are a very different beast to your standard developer site, where a developer comes along, puts in a bit of open space, 150 homes, and then pays some commuted sums. And I think that's the key point, because we don't have a free choice here. It's what are the alternatives if we don't go down this route? And the most viable alternative would be a dispersed approach, sites of 150, 200, 300 homes, lots of commuted sums, and that would show you a viable plan. But it wouldn't be a plan that I think communities want, and it certainly wouldn't be a plan that infrastructure providers want. And I don't think it would be a plan, well, I know it would be a plan that neither the council would want. So it's trying to strike that balance, really. And yes, we know there are risks around the strategic sites, but as I said, by acknowledging those risks and setting out an approach where we're trying to deal with them, that I think is a reasonable one, and one that I think can be proven to be sound. I think that, so I've lost my train of thought. As I said earlier, the challenge is we have this infrastructure deficit, and providing infrastructure on the bigger sites tends to be the more effective means of doing that. So I think it is absolutely right that we do go down that route, but yeah, we do accept that there are risks with this.
Okay, thank you. So, who have I got? Oh, sorry, can I just drop? Yeah, thank you. So, we've discussed planning inspectors. Thank you, officers, for responses. Do members wish to make? Are there any comments that we wish to make as a committee to Joint Cabinet about the response to the questions raised by the planning inspector at their visit prior to the last publication? Councillor Armstrong.
Just a comment, not a recommendation, but just to support keeping the net zero targets in as they currently are.
Okay, so would members support that we actually just make a comment in that whichever way we wish to go, I've seen you, Councillor Kohler, so I'll come to you, that actually we retain the net zero targets throughout the planning process. So that's a comment we can make. Councillor Kohler, sorry, do you want to build?
I think there's also a comment that we could perhaps make acknowledging Councillor Davison's comments about how, the inspector says 10% headroom figure is sometimes quoted as a yardstick, and we're currently at 4.4 4%, I think, is where we're at, and Councillor Davison is clearly positioning that as as a bit of a gamble, I guess. Judgment call, gamble, two sides of the same coin perhaps. So I think more clearly acknowledging that. Clearly there might be an upside in that it might succeed, and therefore we kind of get away with slightly fewer sites, or it might backfire and the plan is found unsound. So it feels an important thing, and acknowledging it publicly, I think, would be a good thing.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest a couple of comments there. So the first is that committee are keen that net zero targets should be maintained in the final version of the plan as it's adopted, but also committee wish to draw Cabinet's attention to the continued risks that are still presented by the approach along. Sorry, Councillor Davis, Councillor Armstrong, you're going to come up with some better words.
I was more concerned about whether it's actually a good idea to draw attention to that, depending on what people think about. I mean, who are we drawing attention to? And Cabinet clearly know already, but we could say it. But
I would suggest we've already done it publicly, so it would be a point of record. Councillor Whiteman, are you helping us on this point?
Yeah, it just was on that point. I think we've got to couch it in quite careful terms. I think putting it as a gamble or something would be a little bit. I think we can support the notion that we want to stick to our environmental standards as far as possible, and we want to support affordable homes. And I think we're prepared to ensure that the contingencies match our aspirations in that respect, but I don't think we want to be couching it as a gamble, because I think, that's kind of, we are hopeful that this local plan will get through, but matching those aspirations.
Okay, so I'm being advised that we have some words that can record the conversation. I think we will not use the word gamble. I think that is clear. I think, this committee has highlighted and discussed a risk, which has also been identified by Councillor Davison as leader of the council. And I think it's right that we make sure that that is recorded in the right way in the discussions tomorrow. Are members broadly comfortable with that? Okay, getting enough nods. Councillor Dixon, did you wish to add?
I was mindful of the comments of Mr. Careford, and forgive me if I paraphrase this wrong, where you said that the biggest challenge with the plan is around viability, and maybe we should be, as a committee, endorsing our shared concern in that regard.
Okay, the members comfortable with that we share the concern that's been expressed around viability. Right, okay, so we've got some comments there. The last point, which members may feel that we've covered, but I'm going to put out there anyway, is whether there is advice that we wish to make about soundness of the plan. And officers, correct me if I'm wrong, what I took from figure 4 in chapter 1, it said it's figure 5, but it's actually figure 4, if you did want to make a small typo change, is that the plan is positively prepared, justified, effective and consistent with national policy. So I think I'm getting nods from officers, that's right. Members, Councillor Armstrong.
It's a broad and somewhat high-level point, but it seems to me that there's a real sort of challenge between the housing number targets that were given, so the positively prepared point there, and all of the other requirements of the MPPF, including the effective deliverable and all the rest of it. And we've made a case that it is deliverable and it meets all these targets, but I think there's a real, and this goes to across the country perhaps, sort of tension between those allocated numbers and actually providing good, sustainable locations that meet all the goals and everything else that are purportedly what the MPPF wants. Is there any scope for the inspector to acknowledge that, or the government to acknowledge this? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because it strikes me as the fundamental question at the heart of the plan in some ways. And I'd hope that the planning inspectorate would at least be able to acknowledge that rather than just assume everything's fine. But
I think it's a good point, and I think think they do, and that's, planning is a subjective process, and that's why soundness is, it's not, binary in that sense. It's not always clear cut. It's the sort of force of the argument within the context, and I'm confident that the plan was set out within the context with the arguments we're using. Inspector would be swayed by those arguments because they'll be able to see that it is a difficult position we're in, but equally we need to deliver this growth and we need to do it properly, and we need to have the support to do it. So yes, the inspectors interpret what's submitted to them. It's not clear cut in that sense, and that's why it can be difficult to come up with a clear, artificial answer. Well, does it sound or doesn't it sound? Well, it depends. I'm confident that the inspector would find our plan sound, but that's not to say that there aren't risks, of course. And as the advisory inspector said to us, he's a certain type of inspector. You can get other type of inspectors who are much more focused on certain other issues. So it does depend on the inspector as well. But as I say, hopefully it's a plan that the objectives are understood, and the inspector can read the plans as a whole and see what we're trying to achieve with it.
Thank you. Right, so I've got Councillor Mateki and then Councillor Aizlewood. So Councillor Mateki.
Thank you, Chair. I think as was pointed out the other day, we only have a 5.48 year, a 5.48%. Was it a 5.48 year housing supply? That's 0.48 more than we need of a year. Now, to my calculation, that only needs a relatively small site each year, and we're going to fail before we've even started, and we're going to be exactly where we are now, where we don't have a 5-year land supply. So I think this whole plan is doomed to fail.
Thank you, Councillor Mateki. Councillor Aizlewood, then Councillor Kohler.
So I suppose my comment is a sort of a slightly different interpretation of Councillor Armstrong's, but it seems to me that the housing numbers are set by central government, and we've made a local decision to apply those targets over 25 rather than 15 years. And as such, we have a completely unrealistic framework for making a plan. So it isn't surprising to me that we are making a wholly unrealistic plan. So officers are working really hard, desperately clutching at straws to find viable and sustainable sites. So even if we accept this framework and that the current plan notionally meets its housing target, how sound is a plan really that is not in the interest of local residents and likely to fall over within a very short time of being adopted? And is it not better to recognise this situation and call it out and start again based on a more limited 15-year plan?
Thank you, Councillor Aizlewood. Do you want to respond to that, Mr.
Careford? Obviously, I don't agree. I think surprising, slightly flippant response, but I think it's, the plan period length, I think, is a bit of a myth, because yes, the global total of housing in the plan is, for 25, 30 years is obviously double what it would be for 10, 15 years. But all that means is that if we went for a shorter plan period, in 10 years' time, we'd be back here trying to find locations for exactly the same quantum of homes that we'd otherwise planned for. The point of going for a longer plan period is twofold. It's A, to give certainty to communities about where homes are being located, where development's going over the long term. The second point is around the infrastructure one. And whilst a a shorter plan, you wouldn't need as many strategic sites. You'd still need enough sites and enough local sites to get to the 5-year supply. So the viability challenges and the risks around the plan would still be there regardless of whether you have a 15-year plan or a 25-year plan. I think you're absolutely right that there is a risk around the 5-year supply, and that's where the point around headroom comes in. And officers' advice has been clear that the more headroom, the more sites you've got in the plan, the more flexibility you've got, and the more assurance you've got around the 5-year supply. So that is a risk. We acknowledge that, but we've got to find a plan that is capable of political support, that we believe gets us where we need to be. We will be updating the 5-year supply position on submission. It will take into account the last year of completions, as well as any consents that both councils grant on the tilted balance sites. And the more, obviously, the councils can do now in the next 6 months, the stronger position we'll be in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hazel?
Yeah, just to come back on the point about it doesn't make it easier doing a 15-year than a 25-year. So in an answer to an earlier question, I asked about the viability of the two of the largest sites, so 12-1 and Hatton. And I think the response was that these are sort of very much back-ended, they're strategic locations, you need to build infrastructure, most of the housing comes at the back end of that. So the point about the 15 as opposed to 25 is that we would be less reliant on that, because we would have more in the bag from what we already have, and we would be less reliant on the least viable sites.
So I think what we need to do is look at the trajectory of those sites and understand the viability picture. But then it comes back to what those sites are seeking to provide, and what their objectives are. It's a difficult picture, but in sense of that wider plan making, and achieving some of the both councils' wider objectives for their district, a 25-year plan gives a greater opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Davison?
A couple of points, if I may. First of all, on the plan length, Councillor Hazelwood, I proposed that went to the preferred options consultation back in December 24. And on balance, people didn't agree with me overall at the joint cabinet, so that didn't happen. If we took your proposal seriously, that means we're not doing this plan, and it's then into the new period. So I don't know what officers would think, but I'm thinking 3 years, maybe more, longer without a plan, which then means it isn't the shorter plan or the longer plan, it's no plan, and for a considerable length of time. So it's sort of piecemeal development, highly dispersed, lack of infrastructure. So I don't think that at this stage would solve the problem. Both Councillor Hazelwood and Councillor Matetsky asked about whether these will all be delivered, and you may remember with the last meeting we had, I asked about total housing numbers across the country, and if you add the government's requirements up, it was 371,000 homes per year, which is 49% higher than the maximum ever built since 2000. So these are completely unrealistic figures across the country, and so I do share your cynicism. But this is back to, we're given this really difficult situation, and how do we make the best of it? And again, if you just say, oh, well, let's just not bother with the plan, because it is going to fall apart at some point, if governments continue with this unrealistic housing numbers, it is then back to the dispersed model and lack of infrastructure. So my view is, despite the absurd situation government's put us in, we need to do the best we can to do the best for residents, which means infrastructure, and plan as best we can.
Can I just clarify one thing, which I think is a bit of a correction? So when does our existing local plan finish? When does it run out?
The Warwick District Local Plan is 2029. I think the Stratford Core Strategy is 2031. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not being a pedant here, but just for the sake of accuracy, we will still have a local plan. We have a problem with housing trajectory and 5-year land supply, but that plan still exists. Am I correct?
Yes, but because you don't have a 5-year supply of the critical policies within it, such as your dispersal strategy, your settlement boundaries, they have very little weight, if any. So yes, you have a plan on paper, but you don't have, it's not meaningful in that sense, and that's why we're trying to get this new plan in place as soon as possible, not only to rectify having the strategy, but also to have stronger policies that pick up the members' desires and objectives as well, that perhaps aren't captured in the existing local plans.
Thank you. Are you coming back on this point? Yeah.
Just to clarify, my thinking on this is that to agree a plan that is potentially not sound in the sense of not being robust, and that we very quickly come off our new housing targets, because it's unlikely that builders would suddenly massively increase their building, as the point that Councillor Davison's made, to the new target. So we're very quickly off target. So it's not a case of having no plan and total chaos, or a plan and a sustained period of 25 years of certainty. It's nothing like that. It's very much more nuanced, I believe.
Thank you. Councillor Chilvers, did you want to come in briefly?
Yeah, just on the 5-year housing land supply and how tight it is to the 5 years. I mean, that is obviously true, and it's a political judgment, isn't it? You know, the way we're trying to protect as much countryside as possible, and to try and stop that development, and that has that issue with the headroom, and I think it's up, but it is a genuine discussion and political judgment. So if other political groups want to propose putting sites back in from that list, or other sites that are on that list that were sort of down the list of the HELA performing, then that is a reasonable political thing to put forward.
Thank you. Mr. Careford, and then I'll come to Councillor Kohler.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, so I'm just looking at figure 14 in the plan itself, which is the Warwick trajectory, and it would appear that certainly all of the strategic sites, bar COV 3, come on stream by 2032-33, and COV 3 is the Kings Hill site that actually has already got consent, so this is the remaining 1,500 that is very far back-ended. So in terms of the trajectory, we are relying on all of the strategic sites to come forward relatively quickly.
Right, thank you. Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, Chair. On the table that Mr. Careford was talking about, figure 14 of the local plan, so it seems to peak, the projected annual completions peaks for Warwick District in 2031-32 at 1,881 houses. When was the last time we delivered that number of houses in a year within the district?
Sorry, I was actually looking at the figure rather than the diagram. So what was the number you just quoted, Councillor Kohler?
1,881 is the projected annual completions for 2031/32 in figure 14, the Warwick housing trajectories, which I think is page 52 of the appendix.
The answer is never.
The what policies have we got in the local plan that are going to encourage developers to build here rather than in other places? Are we doing anything to either increase training of house builders or attract overseas house builders, or stop building in other parts of the country and attract them to build here instead? I can't think of any other options.
I think it goes back to having a range of sites, having an up-to-date local plan, because that means that you've de-risked the development, so the developers will build where it's easy to build because they have a consent. We've also we're not a single market area, we're a large geography that's got lots of different market areas to it, so that means you can have multiple sites on the go. I think your point, though, about the wider capacity of the industry is a valid one, and that's one that I think that the government's target doesn't really take into account. As I say, we are being driven by that housing target. That housing target has not been sense checked. It comes out of a mathematical model. But I think members, we have a choice, don't we, that we either seek a plan that has that number in it, or we don't bother. Now, you might be correct and say, well, it's more realistic because we're not going to build that number, but the downside of not bothering with a plan is you will get a fair amount of development, but as I say, it won't be on the sites you want, it won't be in the places you want it, and it won't be with the infrastructure. It's a bit of a rock and hard place in some respects, but if we can do what we're meant to be doing, then it does put the onus on the industry. And I know the West Midlands Combined Authority, they've been promoting modular build. We've got a policy about modular build, whether that's the way forward or advanced methods of construction. So I think it's what we never really talk about, although I touched upon it earlier in response to Councillor Dixon, was around the monitoring indicators. When you adopt a plan, it's very easy to say, oh, yeah, we've done it now, we can sit back and relax. And I've known, I think there've been councils that have got rid of their policy teams. But the point is, it's then about implementation. And it's working much more proactively with the development industry to bring sites forward, to resolve issues, to address some of those things, because it's in our interest to deliver the plan that we've set out.
I think those are excellent points. Thank you very much for making all of those. I think they all apply to our situation now with the lack of 5-year land supply. We could be doing all of those things now, trying to bring the sites forward to get our 5-year land supply back. It's the same situation, it's just this local plan then puts the bar up, gives higher numbers.
Sorry, sorry, Councillor Kohler, can I just ask a question on that, which is, I think, pertinent and related. So in effect, we don't have a 5-year land supply at the moment, and part of that is down to the slow build out of things that have already been developed. Councillor Mateki has already drawn attention to the fact that actually this plan going in, we only have just over a 5-year land supply. Is there a scenario where we have continued slow build out and actually our 5-year land supply disappears very quickly, and then pretty much we're back to square one of developers building where they would want to anyway? So I've seen Councillor King's waving at me, so I might come to him first.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that the answer to that is very, very simple, because all that we're doing here is within the framework provided by the market. So while interest rates remain where they are, where build costs continue to go up, where we lose significant parts of our workforce because of Brexit, where house builders at the moment in our own district are slowing if they haven't stopped on various projects because of not being able to sell houses, we're all at mercy of the market. And that's the environment that the government has put us in. And all we can do is do the best we're trying to do, as I keep saying, provide what we can in terms of information and evidence to back up where we are, and hope this gets accepted by the inspector, and then see what the next 10, 15 years provides. We can't do any more than that.
Mr. Clark, I think you've drawn the short or long straw.
No, definitely the short straw. Yeah, no, thank you. Just to follow on from what Councillor King said, is there a possibility that we might find ourselves not long after the local plan is adopted of not having a 5-year housing land supply because of a variety of factors that are outside our control, notwithstanding the work that we've all done to create a local plan and get it adopted? That is a possibility. What I would, though, say is the situation we're in now in this district, and I think Mr. Careford can comment, but I think Stratford's is probably quite similar. We're coming to the end of our plan period. We've got a plan. Our current local plan is an 18-year plan from 2011 to 2029. We're coming towards the end of that. Most of the sites have been built out, all of the, let's call it the low-hanging fruit, the easier to develop. And what we are left with is a smaller number of sites and some of the more problematic sites to come forward, and sites which we hoped would bring housing forward much more quickly than they have, just not doing so. Kings Hill being the obvious example, and we all know about that. If you have a look at the housing trajectory that we've set for the South Warwickshire local plan, as I think somebody commented a moment ago, it will take a few years before the strategic sites start delivering. Not that many years, but a few years before the strategic sites start to deliver meaningful numbers of homes. And it is possible that at the examination, given the headroom, as the comment was made earlier, the inspector might say, do you know what, in the early years of the plan, I think you should have a few more smaller sites just to keep that headroom a bit higher and guarantee that you won't slip out of a 5-year land supply too quickly. That is possible, and that would get discussed at examination. But if you have a look at the wider trajectory, and it's figure, sorry, trouble is I've got too many tabs open now, here we go. It's figure 15 of the local plan. You'll see that once we get to about 2030, the trajectory is showing significantly high levels of development over the number that we have to deliver. And so actually by that stage, there is plenty of potential for there to be enough housing that will clearly bring us back into a 5-year supply position. Now, one of the advantages with the South Warwickshire local plan is we're not fixing on one site now, as indeed we weren't in the Warwick District local plan when we first adopted it. There's a range of sites. Between them, they could bring forward some. Will some come forward slightly slower than we're hoping? I'm sure they will. Others won't. It'll even out. And so what the housing trajectory shows us is that for many years, from about 2030 to 2042, we should be able to easily or comfortably meet our land requirements. So hopefully that will give you some confidence. And again, it's another reason for the longer plan period and building in more development over a longer period. You are spreading, I don't want to say spread, well, you are, I suppose, spreading the risks around housing delivery over a wider number of sites, and therefore making your likelihood of maintaining a 5-year supply position in the long term more robust.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to come to Councillor Mateki. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kohler, did you want to come back? Okay, sorry, Councillor Kohler. Sorry, Councillor Mateki, you have to wait a moment.
Sorry. Thank you. I was just going to ask two questions, really, as follow-ups. On that same table, so the Warwick housing trajectory, the figure for 2025-26 was 635. So is that the number that was delivered in the last financial year? And the number for this financial year is 761. Are we on track for delivering that?
So the monitoring's being done as we speak, I believe. So it's always 6 months behind. So the figure for 25-26, yes, should be correct. And then for we're still in So I'm getting my years wrong. So 25-26 will be confirmed later this year. So that 635, I think, will be an estimate. And then, obviously, when we get into the end of 2027, we'll know what the 26-27 figure is. So again, that's a projected estimate. But I think the intelligence we're getting is that that they're about that level because of the sluggish housing market we've got.
Right, I'll come to Councillor Mateki, and then what I will... Oh, sorry, Mr Cornford, are you coming in on this point? I'm trying to move us on, but...
Yes, if you don't mind. Yeah, just a quick one. Just following on, well, I suppose following on from the comment that was made before about how making development more desirable in the district. I think it's a good point, but it's a difficult one because there's an easy way to make developers invest more in our area, and that is to have much less stringent requirements in our local plan around infrastructure, around things such as net zero. But clearly, that's not politically palatable. It's not. It wouldn't be palatable to our residents. It wouldn't be palatable to officers. So there are things that we could very easily do to make Warwick District more attractive for house builders to build, and that would help with the 5-year housing land supply position. But clearly, we don't want to go down that route. So it is kind of, balancing what we want from developments, and so.
Yes, just a very quick point. At the examination, if the inspector is not happy with our trajectory in the 5-year supply position, it doesn't automatically render the plan unsound. The inspector is more likely to say, okay, councils, let's adjourn the examination, go and do some more work, as Mr Clark said, find some more sites. So I just wanted to make that point that although we do have a relatively minimal 5-year supply, it is a 5-year supply. If the inspector's not happy with it, it's not automatic failure. It's, I'm sure there's an ability to rectify that, but the solution will be, as Mr Clark said, more sites. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. I'm going to come to Councillor Mateki, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask members what comment we want to make about soundness to joint committee. So, Councillor Mateki, come to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I totally agree with Councillor King's assessment on this. Developers are only going to build out what they can sell. And even now, and so I don't really agree with what's just been said, there are developments that are being built or in the process of being built, and the developers cannot sell the houses on the sites now. So this is nothing about making it more attractive. They can't sell them. There isn't the demand there. So that is a big issue. And so what I would like to say is that we've been continually told about this December deadline. We're being rushed into this. There's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of unhappiness from councillors, from the public. There's sites in there that have never been consulted on. Since January, there was another call for sites. We've now got the final proposals. We've got the Park and Ride and other sites being put forward. These are all things that nobody's had a chance to actually comment on and consult. And all I'm going to say is, look at the old sort of saying, act in haste and repent at leisure. Let's take our time, and if that means we don't meet the December deadline, it's not the end of the world, because we're going to be exactly in this same position very soon afterwards anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Mateki. Right, okay. So that was a good conversation, and thank you to everyone who supported that. Do members have a view of the comments that we want to make to joint committee? What is our guidance to them? Councillor Kohler.
To a large extent, they know this, but to underline it, it's one thing to have a plan, and it's one thing for the market to then deliver the plan. And since I became a councillor in 2019, my cynicism about housing developers has just gone on an ever upward trajectory. They play the game. They only do what is in the interests of their shareholders. That's how the market works. Now, we are trying to encourage them to play by a different set of rules, if you like, to act in the public interest rather than the interest of their shareholders. And I don't know, you don't like the word, it feels like a gamble.
Okay, Councillor Mateki.
I'll make a proposal here that it's not going to go down well, but my proposal is that we pause, we have a think, and if that means going back to consultation for 6 weeks, that's what we should do, and get the plan right. Let's not rush this. This is a long-term plan, so it has to be right.
Okay, so we have a proposal from Councillor Mateki. Does anyone wish to second that proposal? So the proposal, just so I'm clear, is that we recommend to Joint Committee that there is a further pause to enable more work to be done to get the plan into a deliverable state. You can ask a question about that proposal?
So is the proposal, you say to consult again, does that mean that you're suggesting the proposal is to rerun the Reg 18 consultation, the preferred options consultation, or is it something different?
To rerun the Reg 18.
Okay.
Based on all the new information that's come in that people have not had an opportunity to consult on since the beginning of this year.
Okay, thank you. So that's...
Sorry. So I think that is effectively saying give up on meeting the end of year deadline. Yeah. So effectively you're saying switch to the new 3-year process. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor King, I think you wanted to make a comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to Councillor Mateki that there is no such thing as getting the plan right. What you might think is a right plan will not be the right plan for your colleagues sitting next to you or either side. The whole problem with the plan is trying to even it out so it's the best thing possible for the district. And each councillor, excuse me, whatever ward they're in, however much development in that ward, the duty of that councillor is to have an overall picture of the whole plan together rather than just what's happening in their ward or their particular interest.
If I may, Chair, my comments are nothing to do with what's in my ward. I am looking at an overall plan. My personal opinion is not because it's in my ward, I'm going to take my ward hat off, but Lapworth site made far more sense to me. There are sites in there, not just in my ward, but in other wards as well, that people have not had a chance to comment on. And so I'm not going to take your points on board. I think they were a bit out of order, to be honest, Councillor King. I can put proposals forward as I like for whatever reason I want. If that's to support my residents, that is exactly what I will do.
Thank you, Councillor Mateki. So we have a proposal from Councillor Mateki. Do we have a seconder for that proposal? Okay, that appears... Councillor Kohler.
I can't quite support that as a proposal, but I think the Joint Cabinet really need to have a serious consideration of the options. So whether that's a discussion that the Joint Cabinet need to have, I think that's a recommendation I could support.
Councillor Kohler, could I? So it doesn't. So we don't have a seconder for Councillor Mateki's recommendation. So the reason I was just pausing you there, Councillor Kohler, was I was scribbling down as you were speaking as well. And the form of words I came up with was that members have concerns about the genuine deliverability of the plan and that this presents a material risk that we'll be back in the same place as we are now very quickly, and that Joint Cabinet should consider that in making their decision. You're going to mess with my words, Councillor Whiteman.
I was just going to say how good they were, but I do think the point that Councillor Mateki made about the concern that some sites haven't been properly consulted on is something that we could reflect in the comments somehow. I just do feel that one or two have been added in quite late on, and you know, while I couldn't support the suggestion because it is the nuclear option, it does kind of sink this as a, you know, as a means forward. I do think in terms of a concern, it's something I would be happy to be noted.
Okay, would members, right, but we'll come to these comments in a minute. Will members be comfortable with that as a comment? Again, a comment to joint cabinet that members of committee are concerned about the lack of consultation on a number of sites that have been added to the plan as we've gone through the process. Getting enough? Am I getting nods there? Okay, right, we'll go with that. Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Hazelwood.
Yeah, I just want to ensure there's been several, I want to say implications, but actually downright false statements about Lapworth, and I want to make sure that that's not reflected in the comments from the committee.
Sorry, you have to be clearer, I'm afraid, Councillor
So
Armstrong.
during this meeting, there's been several statements about Lapworth. For example, that there's a pedestrian pathway to the station, which there isn't from one of the sites that was taken out, actually. And I just want to make sure that that's not reflected in the committee comments and that we're not talking about that kind of thing here.
I don't know. So this committee will not be commenting on specific sites. We're commenting on the principles of how the plan's been put together and the strategy of it. So there's nothing in there about specific sites. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder whether one of our officers could comment on the sites that apparently have not been consulted on. Thank you.
When we did the Reg 18 consultation, so that was the preferred options back nearly 18 months ago. Well, it was 18 months ago now. We consulted on a longer list of the strategic growth sites. We also consulted on the output of the sort of the healer work, which had helped us sift and decide what we're now calling the local growth sites, the smaller sites, including the 3 small sites in Kingswood, but indeed all of the others across both districts. What we didn't consult on at that stage were the final list of sites that were coming forward. So the local growth sites are new to this consultation, but the evidence and the work that underpinned them was all in the previous Reg 18 consultation. And we did ask questions in the Reg 18 consultation to drawing people's attention to that and asking for comments on it.
I think it would be reasonable to surmise that a member of the public might not necessarily look at those principles in the context of a site they didn't think was coming forward, particularly if it related to, if it was. So I think where we're getting to is a comment about sites that were not included specifically within the Reg 18. We are concerned that those have not been consulted on. I think that is the comment that we're making from committee. Mr. Careford, did you want to come in?
Yes, just to say that obviously we're about to, subject to approval, have the Reg 19 consultation, which is obviously an opportunity to make comments about the content of the plan in the context of Southness. Just some sort of observation that obviously if we don't hit the December deadline for whatever reason, we would fall under the new planning system, and that does have a 30-month process for the bulk of the plan. I'm just having a quick look at the how it seems to work, and I know members here and at Stratford have had concerns around the level of engagement, the consultation under this plan. I think if you're trying to condense what we've done so far into a full plan within 3 years, the ability for that engagement and consultation is probably reduced in any event. So there are risks, I suppose, of moving to the new system, is that it may actually result in less engagement because that's what the government seem to be. I may be misquoting the government, but that seems to be the direction of travel the government are moving to.
Okay, thank you. So, right, Councillor Hazelwood, I think this is going to be the last word, and then I'm going to try and get us to a summary comment.
Okay, well, so I've previously expressed concerns about deliverability, soundness, defensibility of the proposals, because some elements of the plan I just don't think are sensible. But I support the words that you came out with earlier, Chair, so I'm very happy to support that wording.
Right, we're just going to read back those words because it's 8:30. We've been going for 2.5 hours. I'm struggling to remember what my name is, let alone what I said a few minutes ago. Yeah, so I think we're at the... Members have concerns about the genuine deliverability of the plan, and this presents a material risk that we will be back in the same place as we are now very quickly, and joint cabinet should take this into account as a pertinent risk when making their decision. So those are the words I would propose that we put forward on the subject of soundness. Am I getting enough nods? Okay, right. That's what we're going to go with. So thank you, everyone. With that, I'm going to close the meeting, but I should say thank you to officers. How many hours have you done in scrutiny with us now? We're up to like... Yeah. So we're up to... Oh, I've got to do confidential minutes as well, have I? The good news is I've got to do some confidential minutes to sign off. So I'm afraid, members of the public, I'm going to have to... well, I haven't officially asked you to leave yet until I ask committee to consider resolving that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following items by reason of the likely disclosure of exempt information within paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, following the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006. I will propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Armstrong, all those in favour? Right, that's passed. Thank you very much for attending this evening. I'm afraid I do have to ask you to leave.